1540, along a dark, well-worn trail, Hernando de Soto traveled in the New World, searching for gold and a water route to the Pacific Ocean. Hostile natives seeking his horses and livestock continuously harassed his party at almost every turn. As fever started to take its toll, de Soto left the relative safety of this trace and struck out due west for the Mississippi River. He never made it. 239 years later, the territorial governor of Louisiana, Meriwether Lewis, left the Mississippi River heading east for a well-known road. Along the same trail traveled by de Soto, he met a similar fate at Grinder's Inn. Please join us now as we take you on a trip along the Devil's Backbone.
Well, here we are at the northern terminus of the Natchez Trace. The movie you're about to see is going to cover the trace from one end to the other. We're actually going to be running it what was considered backwards. Most people walk from Natchez to Nashville. We're going to drive and travel it from Nashville down to Natchez.
We're looking forward to traveling the trace once again. We always find something new and exciting to see, and we are going to thoroughly enjoy this beautiful weather that we're having now, and we'll be telling you more as we go down the trace.
I'd like you to come with us now and join us as we travel the Devil's Backbone, the Natchez Trace Parkway.
We'll see you down the trace.
The trace is old, very old. At first it was a simple path beaten through the bush by the Native Americans and buffalo herds. For several thousand years it connected hunting grounds, salt licks, rivers, and streams to allow hunting and trading between the various tribes that occupied large villages and mound cities. The trail was well worn when Hernando de Soto traveled it in 1540 seeking the elusive Northwest Passage, an all-water route across the continent of North America. The trail brought his demise, just as it would to the explorer that later discovered there would be no such route. By 1789, the settlers of what was then the western frontier along the Ohio and Cumberland rivers began seeking new, more favorable markets for their goods. The Mississippi River gave them access to the Southwest Territories and the seaport of New Orleans. These settlers, or cane tucks as they were called by the people of Natchez and New Orleans, would build flatboats to float their goods down the river. Since these boats could not be navigated upstream against the current, they would be sold for lumber at the end of the trip. They were then faced with a 500-mile walk home. During this time, the trace also served as a post-rider route, providing mail service between Nashville and the new Southwest Territories, attained with the Louisiana Purchase. Traffic was so heavy on the trace that an extensive series of inns or stands soon appeared. They were spaced about one day's foot travel along the road. For about 25 cents, a traveler could get a meal and stay the night. In 1811, the steamboat New Orleans made its way from Pittsburgh down the Ohio and Mississippi rivers to New Orleans. However, even more remarkable, it returned back up the Mississippi against the current, and thus ending one-way travel on this mighty river. Steamboats would soon make the flatboat and the long walk home unnecessary. By 1909, much of the trace was forgotten. The Daughters of the American Revolution long sought to preserve this historical route. They began by placing a stone monument in Natchez marking its beginning, and by 1920 had placed about a dozen such markers along the old route. During the 1930s, public works projects were used to keep Americans working. Building a road or parkway to help preserve the old road had been proposed for many years. In 1934, Congressman Busby of Mississippi introduced the first legislation to fund such a project. Construction of the National Parkway began in 1937 and still continues today. The goal of this project was to purchase land surrounding the remains of the old road that could be identified and then preserve them. Today, this national parkway travels through Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee. Its northern terminus is just south of Nashville, and the temporary southern terminus is just north of Natchez. The parkway is over 450 miles of two-lane paved road with a maximum speed limit of 50 miles per hour. No commercial traffic is allowed on the parkway, and almost all major crossroads pass above or below the parkway grade. Truly an RVer's dream road. Plenty of parking at just about every point of interest provides big rig access, and those areas not RV friendly are clearly marked. A milepost system is used so you can easily track your progress. The Parkway brochure references all services and points of interest to the mileposts. And speaking of points of interest, there are over 114 places to hike, picnic, explore the old trace, study the history, and enjoy this undiscovered national treasure. We'll begin our trip in Nashville, home to country music. Here, historic Ryman Auditorium, birthplace of the Grand Ole Opry, has been completely restored and reopened for tours and special events. It was here that Minnie Pearl and Roy Acuff performed on the famous radio show broadcast weekly from this stage. Many an Opry member could be found between shows taking a break at Tootsie's, whose back door was conveniently located just across the alley from the stage door of the Ryman. Here, modern skyscrapers contrast with the restored buildings of the historic River District. Before the steamboat made the trace obsolete, and river barges replaced flatboats, cane tucks left here from places like Fort Nashboro and many others along the Cumberland and Ohio rivers to float down to Natchez and New Orleans with their goods. Rachel Donaldson came to settle Fort Nashboro with her father, Colonel Donaldson. Rachel would become the wife of Andrew Jackson, and they built their home and plantation, the Hermitage, near Nashville. The fame and glory that Andrew Jackson found along the Natchez Trace would eventually lead him to the presidency. Unfortunately, Rachel died before she could live in the White House. The Double Arch Bridge is one of the newest additions to the Parkway. This bridge allows Route 96 and the valley it runs through to cross far below. From an excellent viewpoint on the south side of the bridge, travelers can view this unique structure. However, the best view of the valley is from the pedestrian walkway along the bridge deck. Again, it is important to remember the Parkway was built to protect, not cover over, parts of the old trace that still existed in the 1930s. When traveling south, the old trace at milepost 426 is one of the first opportunities to park your RV and walk along some of the original trail. Several hikes of varied distance may be started here. At milepost 407, we find one of the few remaining buildings associated with the peak travel period of the trace. John Gordon operated a ferry and trading post here during the early 1800s. While Gordon was away on military expeditions with General Andrew Jackson, his wife, Dorothea, operated the inn and ferry as well as supervising the construction of the present house during 1817 and 1818. John Gordon died shortly after completion of the house. However, Dorothea lived in it until her death in 1859. The site of the ferry crossing at the Duck River can be reached by a short 1/2 mile hike. As the Parkway travels through Tennessee, it winds through heavily wooded lands populated with deer and wild turkey. Although other roads do not cross the Parkway at grade, you will be sharing the road with cyclists. This northern portion of the trace crosses through hilly terrain. Plan on taking your time through here since this is one of the most scenic portions of the highway. Watch your speed as the speed limit rarely exceeds 40 miles per hour in this area. At milepost 404, you'll find Jackson Falls. Here, Jackson Branch departs its original stream bed and plunges down over the bluffs towards the Duck River in the valley below. Take a short walk on a 900-foot paved trail to the base of a small but interesting waterfall along Jackson Branch. Although the trail is steep, there are not many steps and the trip will be worth the walk. The falls are named in honor of President Andrew Jackson. As a general of the Tennessee militia, he traveled the trace on several military expeditions and on one very special personal trip, returning from Springfield Plantation in Mississippi with his new bride, Rachel. Also an excellent picnic spot, Jackson Falls offers another short but more challenging hike up to Baker's Bluff for a beautiful view of the Duck River Valley, almost 300 feet below. On a trip from St. Louis to Washington, D.C., Meriwether Lewis, then governor of the Louisiana Territory, found himself traveling alone along this section of the Natchez Trace. Traveling alone on the trace was never a good idea. Here at the site of Grinder's Inn, one of many stands or inns along the trace, Lewis paid Mrs. Grinder for a meal and a night of board. After dinner, Lewis retired alone to a room. Later that evening, shots were heard from his room. By morning, Meriwether Lewis was dead. President Jefferson and William Clark both believed it to be suicide, although the actual circumstances are still a mystery to many. The original monument, placed by local citizens in 1848, was recently replaced with a new one. Beneath this monument reposes the dust of Meriwether Lewis, commander of the Lewis and Clark expedition. His life of romantic endeavors came tragically and mysteriously to its close on the night of October 11, 1809. Prior to 1848, Lewis's remains were marked with a simple stone marker. What led Jefferson to leave the remains of his hero of Western expansion in the wilderness of Tennessee in a simple pioneer cemetery? The Meriwether Lewis site at milepost 385 also offers picnicking and a very nice campground. As with all the National Park Service campgrounds we'll visit along the trace, no fee is charged for camping. Here you'll find 32 blacktop, pull-through, and back-in sites without hookups. Many of these sites can accommodate large RVs. At milepost 330 sits one of our favorite hikes, the trail to Rock Spring. A fine gravel trail leads over a crossing of Colbert Creek and then along Rock Creek to its source at Rock Spring. At many places along the trail, signs point out unique features of the forest in this area. The return loop is a very pleasant walk through the woods back to the Colbert Creek crossing. Well, here we are at Rock Spring.
This is just inside the Alabama state line. We're just about to the Tennessee River. Rock Spring right here, all this water is flowing out of here and forms Rock Creek, which rolls into the Colbert Creek, which joins the Tennessee River just a very short distance from here. Today it's only about 70, so it's not quite as warm as it would be down here, so the water does seem a little chilly, but it still feels good after a short 20-minute walk to get back in here.
At milepost 328, we come to the crossing of the Tennessee River and the Colbert Ferry site. Crossing the river today by bridge and in an RV is much more pleasant than it was by ferry many years ago. George Colbert operated a stand and ferry at this site for many years. Although the stand survived to be photographed, it was gone before it could be purchased and saved by the Park Service. Even though the river was narrower prior to the construction of Pickwick Dam further down the Tennessee River, the crossing was still a challenge for travelers and General Jackson's army. Colbert once charged General Jackson $75,000 to ferry his troops across the river, a sum Jackson had to pay from his own pocket and later seek reimbursement from the government. The Colbert site has a limited service ranger station, picnic area, restrooms, boat launch, and a swimming area. The early trails that would become part of the Natchez Trace served to connect various Native American villages together for trading purposes and to reach hunting grounds. Bear Creek Mound at milepost 308 was built between 1200 and 1400 AD as a simple ceremonial mound. This site was previously occupied by transient hunting parties to prepare their kill for transport as long as 10,000 years ago. Bar Mounds at milepost 286 is the largest archaeological site in northern Mississippi. These mounds differ from the mound at Bear Creek as they were used for burial. The 8 large dome-shaped burial mounds are spread over an area of 90 acres. Interpretive signs show that the mounds actually cover surface-level graves that also contain the possessions of the deceased. There are 5 mound sites along the parkway, primarily located within Mississippi. At 8 acres, Emerald Mound at milepost 10 near Natchez is the second largest temple mound in the United States. Unlike a ceremonial or burial mound, this temple mound was created by cutting the top off of a natural hill. Occupied from about 1300 to 1600 AD by the Mississippians, the mound served as the center of a great village. By the Civil War, most of the old Trace Road had been abandoned. Nevertheless, some sections still in use saw their share of marching, fighting, and unfortunately, dying. Here at Confederate grave sites, milepost 269, tradition tells us that these graves belonged to Confederate soldiers that marched and camped along this section of the trace. Did they die of wounds, hunger, or disease? Did their families ever know what happened to them? Although the original grave markers may have had names, they disappeared long ago. Here is another opportunity to walk along a preserved section of the old road. The Tupelo Visitor Center at milepost 266 is the park headquarters and only full-service contact site along the trace. Here you can view exhibits, an orientation film, obtain park information, and have your National Parks passport stamped. In 1934, Congressman Thomas Jefferson Busby introduced a modest bill to spend $50,000 on a survey of the old road and to attempt to identify those sections still surviving. 4 years later, the historic road became a unit of the National Park System. The Jeff Busby site is located on Little Mountain. An access road leads to the top where circular loop and RV accessible parking allow access to a shelter and an excellent lunch stop. Another of our favorite walks along the parkway is the Little Mountain Trail. Here you can either hike a half-mile loop trail or go an additional half-mile down to the campground and return by road. Congressman Busby's original bill was not greeted with enthusiasm by the Park Service. In fact, if President Franklin Roosevelt had not needed support from Senator Harrison of Mississippi on another bill, Roosevelt would have vetoed Busby's survey request, and that may have been the end of the trace forever. The Jeff Busby site at milepost 193 also has a picnic area and an 18-site campground featuring pull-through paved sites. Although there are no hookups, camping is free. Although some of the sites are tight, many are large enough for big rigs. Over the years, we have talked to a number of people who have traveled the whole parkway from Nashville to Natchez and said, there isn't anything to see there. It's true that if you simply whisk along in your RV, you'll miss a lot. Cypress Swamp at milepost 122 certainly is an example of this. From the road, you would never guess that a wetland featuring bald cypress and water tupelo trees is within an easy walk. The combination boardwalk and gravel trail lead you on a 20-minute loop walk through this intriguing area. As travel on the trace declined, the route it traveled became less of a frontier. By 1860, Rocky Springs was a settlement of over 2,600 people. The town had a post office, several stores, and a church. The Methodist Church is the only building surviving today. Rocky Springs site at milepost 54 offers modern-day travelers on the old road the opportunity to visit the remains of this once thriving community. A trail leads through a portion of the old town site, past a few foundations, some old safes, and cisterns. As you walk along, you can readily observe one of the reasons the town failed: erosion due to poor soil management. Yellow fever and Civil War also contributed to making this a ghost town. This church was built in 1837 by the Methodist congregation of Rocky Springs. It is maintained by the congregation, who still hold regular services here. Although the church and cemetery are private property, both are open daily to the public. The Rocky Springs site also has a picnic area and a 22-site campground featuring paved, pull-through, and back-in sites. Although there are no hookups, camping is free. At all the National Park Service campgrounds along the trace, water is available in the park along with clean modern restrooms. Again, several of these sites can accommodate large RVs. Stopping at Sunken Trace at milepost 41 always gives us a chance to reflect on what it must have been like facing a 500-mile walk back home. Here you can see how the feet of over 10,000 travelers a year wore down the trail. Many lone travelers and even small parties would fall victim to robbers and murderers along this section of the old road. Consider that you are carrying the proceeds from the sale of all the items you brought down the Mississippi, and there are no banks or ATMs to deposit the cash you received. Maybe you said too much at King's Tavern, boasting about how much money you made selling your goods. Already an intricate network of communication among thieves may be passing the word up the trail about you.
Very few women traveled the Trace. However, one of the most famous was Rachel Donaldson. She traveled from Nashville to stay with friends at Springfield Plantation. It was there that she married Andrew Jackson and returned with him along the Trace to Nashville.
The best thing a traveler could hope for was to reach a comfortable RV at the end of a day's travel. Walking north on the Trace, Mount Locust at Outpost 15 was the first stand or inn that a traveler would reach. This would have been a welcome sight to a weary traveler. Let's go in and learn more from a Park Service ranger with a very special connection to this house.
Well, folks, welcome to Mount Locust. I'm Ranger Rick Chamberlain. The center room of Mount Locust was the first room built in 1779. None of the furniture, the antiques, or the artifacts are original to Mount Locust, but they are authentic to the year 1810, 1820. Everything is either reproduction or an antique. The center room of Mount Locust served as a bar or a tap room for the travelers traveling up the Trace. As you know, these were the boatmen or the cane tucks walking or riding horses from Natchez to Nashville. The old Natchez Trace passed right in front of the house. They'd be given cornmeal mush and a piece of cornbread and a glass of milk when they got here in the same mess for them in the morning. Probably charged about a quarter, which in Spanish gold, which in 1810 was $25 or $30 for 2 meals and a place to sleep. They were allowed to sleep on the back porch or out in the backyard. By 1799, they must have been doing pretty good because they built a 2-story dormitory in the backyard called Sleepy Hollow. 2 floors, wall to wall, corn shuck mattresses. You just came in, grabbed the mattress, and lay down next to another traveler, kind of like a flop house. By 1810, the innkeeper's wife had 11 children in the house. Bedroom on the end for the boys, one behind it for the girls, rest of them in the nursery. 3 bedrooms for the kids. Those are rope beds, they are corn shucks, they are corn shuck mattresses, and they are high off the floor because they had trunnel beds that slid out at night in their sleeping space. The Park Service designated the Natchez Trace as a national park in 1937. They started buying land in the domain from Natchez to Nashville. Here at Mount Locust, they bought they bought 70 acres from my grandmother in 1937, and she moved back behind the cemetery and built her home, and that's where I live today. But the family lived here, my family lived here from 1779 to 1944, 5 generations of the family. I was born in the room on the end in 1940. My father was born in that room, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, built with my great-great-grandfather, my great-great-great-grandmother lived here and shared the girls' room with our granddaughters. We lived here from 1779 to 1944.
As you walk the grounds of Mount Locust, we're sure you'll agree this is the crown jewel of many fine jewels along this national treasure, the Natchez Trace Parkway. We're ending our journey where most travelers began, in Natchez, Mississippi, in King's Tavern. King's Tavern is considered to be the oldest structure still standing in Natchez. As starting point of the Trace, it has served as an inn, tavern, and post-rider stop. Today it serves steaks and seafood. Plan to stop for lunch or dinner, and while there, walk up to the 3rd floor and visit Madeline's room to learn about the most famous of several ghosts that haunt this building. The best way to get an orientation in Natchez is by horse-drawn carriage ride. Departing from the corner of Canal and State Streets, these tours are given by local guides who have lived their entire lives in Natchez. Natchez is considered America's antebellum or pre-Civil War home museum, with over 500 homes, many owned for generations by families of the original owners. The Kaintucks arrived here by flatboat below the bluffs of Natchez. Natchez under the hill was considered a rough and tumble part of town. In those days, this area was several blocks larger. Over the years, the Mississippi River has taken much of this historic area. You can still try your luck on the Riverboat Casino or visit one of the original saloons. After several days of dry camping in the National Park Service campgrounds along the trace, it was great to stop at a full-service campground for a few days. Riverview RV Park offers a pool, high-speed internet, full hookups on spacious RV sites overlooking the Mississippi River. Located just across the river from Natchez, it makes a great base to explore the final few miles of the parkway and everything Natchez has to offer.
We hope you have enjoyed traveling the Devil's Backbone, the Natchez Trace Parkway. We have enjoyed sharing it with you.
We're here on the border of Idaho and Montana on the Continental Divide at Lemhi Pass. This is where Lewis and Clark first crossed into the Columbia River Valley. We're here filming our next video, RVing along the Lewis and Clark Trail. We hope you'll check on its availability soon. Thank you. Before beginning your trip on the Natchez Trace Parkway, we suggest you visit some of these websites for more information. At the Seminars department of our website, you can order our companion CD-ROM from our RV Rally and Show seminar, Traveling the Devil's Backbone. Visit the excellent National Park Service website at nps.gov to order your brochure and map of the trace or download it directly from the site. scenictrace.com is a commercially operated site dedicated to increasing visitation along the trace. And the Natchez website has money-saving coupons you can print off for your visit to Natchez, Mississippi.